I wanna preface this video by saying that modern work ethics are dead. They were killed off by complacency, nepotism, and the complete lack of accountability. Every now and again I play back some of those videos of office ladies at big tech companies just to remind myself why they've chosen to be there in the first place. Seeing them lounging about on beanbag chairs in the canteen, stuffing their faces with donuts and brownies, then going on slurping vanilla and pistachio mocha lattes all day long until there's equal amounts of saliva and liquid dessert in their cups tells me enough about their priorities. And do you know who the real heroes are? Those 50-plus-year-old OG programmers who are tasked with the job to fix shitty entry-level 3 months vocational education code over and over and over again until you finally end up shipping a product that's not only disturbingly average, but also looks like something that just came out of a test environment. The reason why I'm saying this is because Battlefield 6 is clearly a symptom of a dead work culture that has taken root in pretty much every single level of the hierarchy, from the lowest dev all the way to the people responsible for approving and publishing the game on the market. Battlefield 6 released on the 10th of this month with next to no problems on Steam according to people's reports, but ironically EA managed to botch the launch of their first party IP on their own platform. It took them 7 hours to fix an issue that should have never occurred considering they had already launched the game successfully several times during the beta trials. You can go and read the discussions just to get an idea of how badly DICE and EA screwed up. It's an absolute shit show, I can guarantee you that. And what's even funnier, the community manager would mark his messages as solutions even though he was just giving updates on the situation at hand, trying to do some NPC lingo damage control like the absolute corporate puppet he is. At the same time, people who bought the game straight from the source were refunding and moving over to Steam as they were unaware of how long the issues would persist. But for the sake of not being too vague, I'll try to briefly describe what transpired on that day. Many people, me included, were getting all kinds of weird errors, preventing them from playing, like for example in my case I would get that Javelin anti-cheat message where the software wasn't working properly and it wouldn't even let me pass the loading window no matter how many times I restarted it. Crashes weren't that uncommon either. I even read that some people had to tinker with their BIOS to enable secure boot. But the worst and probably the most egregious part of the game's launch was the part where you're finally in the main menu and you try to select either multiplayer or the campaign and the game tells you that you haven't bought either of them. Bitch. I paid 70 euros for that thing. It's not even possible to buy the single player and multiplayer separately. At this point I'm convinced that DICE and EA bootlickers are defending the slackers who quote unquote work there just because they hate being wrong about what I said in the intro. I mean, there is no other logical explanation no matter how I look at it. And you would imagine they've learned their lesson by now with Battlefield 2042's launch, but apparently Electronic Arts are more okay with using live service and legacy IPs as crutches rather than shipping finished games like they used to. Just imagine for a moment if this happened in 2004 or 2005, when we still had physical copies and games as a service was pretty much exclusive to MMOs. That pile of shit they call a game would have cost them millions considering shipping fees and money spent on manufacturing. But look, I really don't want to channel any more of my disappointment into what's already become a quite lengthy intro, so I'd rather move on to the pros and cons. For me, the positive aspects of Battlefield 6 can be condensed into the stuff that's been proven to work in pretty much every game in the franchise. Unlike many developers, DICE didn't try to reinvent the wheel, but rather make it a bit prettier with high-res textures, modern lighting and highly detailed assets. There's a considerable amount of environmental destruction as well as ground vehicles, helicopters, fighter jets. You've got your class-based gameplay too, as in the 4 standard operators you have to choose from before a match, and a wide array of weapons that you unlock as you climb the ranks. When it comes to the shooting, I really cannot praise this game enough for how nice it feels to kill enemies. You can clearly recognize the sound of bullets making contact with the opponent's body, and upon their death you can also hear a very satisfying chime effect as if you hit a small pouch of coins which almost acts as the climax of depleting the enemy's health. And that goes to show how important sound design is when we talk about shooters. You can make the best FPS in the world and still fuck up the shooting part by making it sound flat and underwhelming. To put it simply, if oppressive atmosphere is 50% of a horror game, then sound is 50% of what makes guns fun to use. The other 50% is in my opinion recoil or the lack thereof. And speaking of recoil, again Battlefield 6 pushes all the right buttons. Literally nothing to complain about here. Assault rifles and SMGs have just the right amount of kickback and they really make you wanna play around with them to better up your spread control at different distances. What I really enjoy is attaching 4x optics on my M4 and use the semi-auto fire mode or basically converting it into a light sniper rifle with the option to switch back to full auto in a split second when the situation requires it. Something you shouldn't be sleeping on when it comes to Battlefield games is how important attachments are. A lot of your firearms can exhibit incredible flexibility when it comes to recoil reduction, hipfire accuracy, weight, and so on and so forth, just by swapping a few accessories. You can modify them even mid-game, which can prove to be very useful, especially in the beginning while getting accustomed to each map size and layout. The time to kill in this game is also pretty reasonable, as killing enemies doesn't take too long, but at the same time it gives you or the opponent a chance to use cover and get your bearings if you find yourself in a predicament. Now, regarding the movement in this game, I saw a lot of people complaining about it during the beta, you know, comments along the lines of "this will ruin the feel of Battlefield" or "this isn't Call of Duty, I want my grounded experience back," and I get it. Gatekeeping is important to preserve what you've grown to love, but to me the franchise died with the release of Hardline, and shortly after Battlefield 1 solidified my complete lack of interest in future installments. The IP lost its soul a long time ago because it became evident that DICE and EA no longer care about the identity of the franchise, with one of them never giving a fuck from the very start. I'm gonna let you guess which one I'm talking about, so why do you even get hyped for a game like Battlefield 6, which at this point is clearly a contractual obligation with the sole purpose to make money off of your nostalgia? If anything, you should be opposed to more follow-ups if you consider yourselves real Battlefield fans. That's what actual gatekeeping looks like. So at the end of the day, it seems like you, the fans, are not so different from the Call of Duty fanboys you hate so much, who get excited about each and every remake or a sequel just like you do. Not to mention that DICE is the same exact studio behind a little known game that pretty much changed the first-person shooter forever, so I really don't get why they should abstain from using proprietary mechanics and animations to make Battlefield 6's gameplay more versatile and dynamic. Not saying there should be wall running and double jump, that would be absolutely ridiculous considering the nature of the game, but a simple slide and a forward roll are perfectly reasonable additions to your moveset as a soldier in my opinion. I also really appreciate the fact that you don't have a trajectory arc on your grenades and ordnance in general. The game lets you gauge how far and high you should throw a nade to reach its destination, which I know it's something very minor to gush over, but also enjoyable since it adds a bit of unpredictability to the gameplay. And given the fact developers nowadays think you're stupid, that's even more the reason to celebrate the lack of certain accessibility features. And of course, as you've probably already noticed, I can't get enough of the M2010 ESR. I've probably spent 90% of my playtime sniping people in Battlefield 6. It just feels great to land those headshots and play mind games with your opponent from a distance. There's something deeply exhilarating seeing the sun rays bouncing off a couple or more lenses and hearing bullets zooming past your head, just that primal feeling of knowing that you're hunted, but you're also hunting them down too. Not gonna lie, I've always loved long-range combat in previous Battlefield games, or any game for that matter, and sniping in Battlefield 6 is no exception. The current, and I'm gonna put an emphasis on current Battlefield 6 build, is completely devoid of microtransactions, although there are two editions, the Standard and Phantom, the latter one of which unlocks exclusive cosmetics for both teams. That being said, at the moment there isn't an actual in-game store where you can buy skins, weapon chests, and all that garbage that's normally a staple in EA games. I reckon at some point Electronic Arts will force DICE to implement a shop in the menu, and I have a pretty good reason to think that's gonna happen, simply because the error I got right after I installed the game seemed as if though they were testing a feature that lets you buy the multiplayer and single player separately. I really hope I'm wrong about that, but as I said, so far I'm happy there aren't any battle passes and bundles that hit you right in the face after you press the play button. And that's pretty much all I can say about the positives. Again, many of the good aspects of Battlefield 6 are mechanics from previous releases that are just a time-proven formula, so I don't really feel the need of elaborating on each and every gun modification or an operator kit. As for the negatives, I can talk all day long about how DICE didn't understand the assignment and left a lot of people disappointed, but I'm gonna try and touch on the most important things that in my opinion lessen the quality of Battlefield 6 the most without focusing on very minor stuff. My biggest disappointment so far are the maps. Not only are they considerably smaller than for example those in Battlefield 3, but they also lack in variety. Every single level is a landlocked territory with no access to lakes or seas, which also limits the vehicle disparity to only land and air machines. The fact that there aren't any motorcycles in this game is also pretty depressing, since those were one of my favorite vehicles to drive in Battlefield 4. And that's not all. You'd assume the newest addition to the franchise would at least have 2 or 3 types of weather events like in 2042, but no, there's none of that. And knowing EA, they've probably saved those weather changes for the DLCs so that people gobble them up like freshly baked bread after their announcement. Just imagining how many expansion packs are bound to come out in the next year or so, locking features behind the paywall makes me wanna vomit, but that's EA for you. Nothing you can do about it, unless you choose to vote with your wallets, and even that won't help because upper class addicts will buy expansion packs for them and all their friends, so I guess we're screwed. As much as I love long-range combat in Battlefield games, I can't help myself but point out that Battlefield 4 has default 8x scope on the snipers, going all the way up to 40, but in Battlefield 6, 8x is the maximum zooming distance. I don't know what DICE were thinking, but they definitely could have done better than that. The standard game modes are also quite underwhelming, the majority of them with the exception of Deathmatch and Bomb Squad are just the same shit on a different plate, where you have to take control of sectors and keep them in your possession until the time runs out. There's nothing new, nothing that stands out like, let's say for example, a hostage rescue scenario or a gun game mode, or even tower defense, which is a shame because now that there are drones in this game, I reckon they'll be a pretty fun enemy to deal with while protecting important cargo or a server room for instance. The only way to experience something different in this game's multiplayer is through Portal, which is basically modded community servers, but at the time of writing this review they're incredibly buggy and shitty. The one that I somewhat enjoyed playing though was Parkour Extraction, where you have to avoid the ground like the floor is lava and extract with supplies that drop at a random spot on the map, but that's pretty much it. Really nothing to write home about when it comes to multiplayer variety. One thing that I noticed when I first launched the game was that they used some kind of broken AI voice to narrate the menu, and it is so damn bad. I mean, just listen to this for a moment.
Menu narration on. Menu narration on. Subtitles on. Color presets default. Graphics ampersand audio. Graphics quality auto. World brightness. Field of view. World graphics quality auto. Performance. Graphics quality auto.
Do you think this has a place in the game, and more importantly, what exactly is its purpose? I personally think this is completely redundant and moronic, but feel free to disagree with me. At least I'm glad they gave me the option to turn it off, because I couldn't handle it any longer than I already had. I'm also pretty sure sound is completely busted at elevation. I remember one time I was standing next to a rock, and the enemy was walking around on top of it, but instead of hearing his footsteps coming from above, the noise was just panning over from one ear to the other, as if there were two enemies taking turns trying to flank me from both sides. And I really wish all those rookie developers on the team who have never played the game in their lives, apart from maybe some cozy true sloppa, understand how important it is to get the sound right. If you're playing without it, you're giving yourself like a 35% handicap, but if it's on and it doesn't work as intended, you're not much better off because in that scenario it confuses you. So what's even the point of having sound effects on? I really don't know why game studios struggle so hard with finding good sound designers and engineers nowadays. Respawn's Apex Legends is suffering from a similar problem. Sometimes you hear the footsteps of running enemies and sometimes you don't. Anyway, if they fix it, then fine. If they don't, honestly I couldn't care less. My emotional attachment to the Battlefield franchise is long gone, and I doubt I can ever bring myself to care about this IP anymore. To no one's surprise, there's also bugs in the game, and I'm not including those I already mentioned earlier in the video. There's actual visual glitches and junior developer level of AI programming that's mostly present in the campaign, but you also have some considerable amounts of junk in the multiplayer as well, like for instance, when the round ends and you don't start mashing the continue button vigorously, after the round is over, you're stuck on the reward screen for an ungodly amount of time unless you press escape to return to the main menu. Being stuck at the spawn point with teammates bursting out of my chest like newborn aliens while begging the opposite team to end my suffering wasn't pleasant either. But the humorous potential of this game in my opinion shines the brightest in the story mode, especially if you dare think outside of the box for a bit, and then you witness your team completely lose their pathfinding abilities as they start wandering around in circles like headless chickens. And that also reminded me of that one video where a guy was comparing the AI of cockroaches in Half-Life 1 to that of NPCs in Cyberpunk 2077, and it's just so fucking hilarious. I know I probably shouldn't be laughing considering I'm making fun of something I used to love being destroyed right before my eyes, but I just can't help it, man. How can you not be entertained by junk that belongs in a solo indie dev game, but you see it in a AAA campaign instead? And if that wasn't amusing enough, wait until you hear your squad member Lopez sawing out while emptying his magazine on barren rocks in the distance.
Motherfucker! Gecko, now!
Target down!
Lopez! Lopez, sniper is down!
Shortly after that, Murphy goes up to him to verify his buddy hasn't lost his testicles somewhere near the power plant we've just gone through.
Hey, Lo. You good? Yeah, I'm good.
Or that one part at the start of what I believe is Mission 7, where you see Mullah Al-Khatib's hair spawning on his scalp as he is giving the most underwhelming, devoid of any passion speech, while also poking out of a tank's hatch like a lemming. And when you see those facial animations during the real-time cutscenes, you just can't help but remember how projects like this one get outsourced to India and Malaysia, where even more unskilled developers than those working in the headquarters produce comedic gold that can easily eclipse a movie starring Louis de Funès. The time between interacting with an object and the animation of you doing it takes about 7 business days, give or take. Player choice is practically non-existent, given the fact we're talking about a linear story without any traces of RPG elements, but I think this time around DICE took it a step too far. Basically what I mean by that is, as I was playing as the female operator, I didn't understand the assignment at first. It was around 5:30 in the morning, and at this point I'd played nearly 12 hours, so I thought my teammate wanted me to find a C4, much like I did during the last mission, and stick it onto an anti-aircraft turret. Well, turns out you have the C4 in your kit as a recon operator, but as I said, I was too tired to pay attention to the subtitles, so I started wandering around the mission area looking for explosives. After a good minute or so, I ended up finding the detonator, but I was still unsure as to where the explosives were. Lo and behold, you don't even have to worry about failing the mission or restarting it, because after a couple of minutes, the AAA gun explodes on its own without any outside intervention. A truly magnificent player choice moment. If you're stuck, Battlefield 6 got you covered. It starts playing itself. I don't know about you, but that sounds like a game journalist's wet dream to me. Also, near the end of the campaign, you realize enemies can shoot through layers of concrete with their machine guns. I wish I could do that, and the list goes on. Another example of Battlefield 6 being a shitty indie project in disguise is the way this game stifles any degree of player agency. You can clearly notice that by your inability to kill teammates and civilians. But that's not all. How about trying to shoot enemy soldiers during the night raid of Cairo? Well, you can't, because the moment you try to do so, you immediately fail the mission, and the game doesn't even allow for the situation you've created to play out, let alone give you the chance to mow down everyone before you get to the palace. But no, this game is awesome, guys, wow. In case you're wondering if you can play the campaign in offline mode, I think you already know what my answer will be. In fact, I'm asking everyone who still hasn't decided if they want to spend 70 euros on Battlefield 6 to think long and hard before they make up their mind. What are you getting for those 70 bucks or euros, whatever your currency is? Well, you receive a campaign that you cannot as much as start offline. In fact, you can't even play against bots nor enter the shooting range. And given the size of the single player compared to the only 5 GB of storage space required for the online modes, I assume that the former would cost a lot more than the latter, putting it at roughly 54 euros. Now answer me this, do you still wanna buy a 54 euros campaign that you do not own and cannot play offline, and also spend 16 more euros for the most barren multiplayer in a Battlefield game to date? Again, I want you to think long and hard about that. It's not a secret that modern games are required to have a certain percentage of political correctness in them, and Battlefield 6 is not an exception to that rule. The moment you enter a lobby, you hear women soldiers yelling everywhere, which I'm not gonna lie is quite funny at the beginning, but after a while it starts grating on your ears like nails on a blackboard. But to really appreciate the levels of wokeness in this game, one must play the single player where all masks are off. Literally. Battlefield 6 Story Mode felt like a failed attempt at reimagining Battlefield 3's campaign, but this time with a more diverse cast and the protagonist asking the questions. And since we've reached the point of the video where I'm gonna be summarizing the plot, I recommend that you do what most people who don't like spoilers do, but in case you're immune to that and you don't plan on playing the game yourself, you may as well stick to the end. Battlefield 6's campaign will take you a little over 5 hours to complete if you don't waste your time searching for collectibles during your playthrough. Now, in this game in particular, you don't play as one character from start to finish, but judging by the beginning and how often you're looking through the POV of Sergeant Dylan Murphy, one could easily guess he's the main protagonist in the story. The events take place after an organization under the name Pax Armata initiates a strike on a NATO base in Georgia upon a peaceful withdrawal of the NATO military forces. You're being stationed there with your squad waiting to be extracted, but after the ambush you decide to prioritize destroying the servers containing technology capable of jamming satellites so that it doesn't fall in the enemy's hands. Soon after after you set everything up, you hop into a chopper along with your teammates, but to nobody's surprise, the helicopter gets shot down and you wind up in a burning vehicle surrounded by packed soldiers. Following the death of your friends, you witness being killed one by one, reinforcements turn up at the site of the crash and drag your ass out of there. After the intermission, Murphy and his new squad infiltrate the residence of a Fed called Melissa Mills, and they start asking her questions about what transpired behind the scenes. And that's also where, to put it in the nicest way possible, the game draws a heavy inspiration from Battlefield 3 by using the interrogation cutscenes as a backdrop for what's already happened in the past. Or in simple words, the pre-rendered clips are the present, and the missions in between those interludes are the events prior to breaking into Melissa's house. So, back to the past. After your extraction from the crash site, you're assigned to a new team and you get deployed to Gibraltar to aid the British in retaking their territory that's acquired by the enemy forces. At that point, Pax Armada had been labeled a global threat, especially after they themselves confirmed that the assassination of NATO's Secretary General was their doing. At the end, you managed to drive Pax away from the colony, but in doing so you also failed to capture their leader Kincaid. Your next destination is Egypt, where you're tasked with finding a guy called Selim who's providing Pax with information. By the time you get to him, it's already too late, as he's been mortally shot by enemy soldiers, but it turns out one of his thumbs has some sort of an implant where he stores intel on Pax. The device gives us useful data about Kincaid's next strike, which is New York, more specifically Brooklyn, but it doesn't tell us anything about Pax's intentions to assassinate the US president. Saving the lives of millions puts a spanner in Kincaid's words, but apparently we're not done yet, as our next objective is to take the head of state to safety. The successful extraction is then followed by Pax's leader killing one of our teammates and leaving us alive, for our plot armor is way too thick for him to penetrate. The failed assassination of the commander-in-chief pushes him to wage a war against Pax Armada, and our next stop happens to be Tajikistan to aid NATO in sabotaging Kincaid's plan to launch powerful ICBMs to who knows where. We have also been instructed to find and eliminate the enemy's leader, who's hiding in one of the bunkers there. After finding him and taking away his ability to run, Kincaid hung out all of Melissa's dirty laundry, but soon after that he made the mistake to reach for his knife and died like an idiot. Nonetheless, we learn about the true nature of our superior Melissa, and that she's been working with the CIA, the US government and Selim to create an enemy formidable enough to prompt NATO to get their shit together and prevent his dissolution, that enemy being Pax and its leader Alexander Kincaid, who's been Mills's plan from the very beginning. Despite that Kincaid might have acted on his own accord, this still doesn't change the fact that Melissa's the one who's responsible for helping create the biggest terrorist organization America and Europe have ever had to deal with. She's the one who's liable for the deaths of innocent civilians in New York City, as well as the president's murder attempt. She indirectly wiped out Murphy's former crew and the commander of his new squad, Huss Carter. She herself ordered NATO's forces to bomb Pax's headquarters while Murphy and his buddies were still there, so why should I have any sympathy for her? If the game ended the way I think it did, by Dylan Murphy putting a bullet in her body and not letting her escape through the back door instead, for me that's a satisfying enough conclusion to the story. That being the case, I'm not happy with the overall presentation of the campaign. We went from an almost exclusively white cast in 3 to having a squad consisting of 2 Mexicans, one of them being a very annoying woman who's also a hunter at heart, because we can no longer have games where women are weak and men have to protect them. You as the main character have to play as a black guy, your former team leader is some kind of a mutt, and Hemlock, the only white guy with blue eyes, has a mask on his face throughout the whole game, with the exception of the last cutscene, as if the developers were ashamed or scared of showing someone of Western or Northern European descent, so they tried to hide his features. Not to mention that when you land in Sergeant Taker's camp and you start walking among his soldiers, even though their faces are covered, you still feel as if you're strolling past an Ethiopian platoon as opposed to an American one. Just out of curiosity, I decided to check the ethnic composition of the US Army as a whole, and if the information Google gave me as an answer is correct, then that means more than 50% of those people should have Anglo-Saxon and Germanic phenotypes. I failed to find a single person who wasn't brown, Asian or of African origins. Call me whatever you want, but you can't deny the fact that this is a weird sight to see. Literally every modern AAA game treats white people as if they either don't exist, or they're some kind of a rare mythical clan with only about a dozen people left in it, dispersed throughout the globe. It's ridiculous, and even if you don't agree with how I phrase myself, the least you could do is acknowledge the fact I'm right, because otherwise you're making yourself look stupid. I also can't shake off the thought that half of my team in the campaign consists of a soy boy, and as I already mentioned, a very irritating young woman, Simone Espina, also known as Gecko.
You were told to shut up! I don't do executions. No. You put me on the team because I'm a hunter.
She's the definition of a Mary Sue character who always puts on a tough act as if she realizes she can't stack up against her male counterparts, but is still trying her best just to prove everyone that she belongs. Her dubbing actor even grunts every now and then to sell us the idea of how tough Espina is, and is just... I don't know, she's actually so annoying. I had a hard time going through her voiceover to make this video, and I'm being serious about that. And obviously the part where she shouts in Hemlock's face is just pure gold.
That is not the fucking question!
The apex of feminism in Battlefield has been reached, guys. I honestly struggle to think of anything that can top that particular scene, and that's all the more reason for me to choose Espina's physiognomy to be the thumbnail of this video. So yeah, I hope you like that pouting mug of hers. Of course, with the glorification of the diverse protagonist in modern games comes the trope of the villainous white guy, and Battlefield 6 truly lives up to the reputation of a game made by raging leftists, as they've casted the whitest of all characters as the main adversary. And now that EA has been acquired by Saudi Arabia, I think you should also say farewell to any potential future concepts of Muslim antagonists. I truly pity the people who are chanting we're so back, because we clearly aren't, and Battlefield 6 is a bitter reminder of what's inevitably bound to happen to every ongoing franchise we grew up with. Do I recommend Battlefield 6? Hell to the no. The game is unfinished, buggy, lacking in content, it's hilariously woke, and above all else, you're not even able to play the campaign offline. Yeah, the shooting and the helicopter fights are fun, but so are those in Battlefield 3 and 4, and you can buy those games for a lot cheaper than Battlefield 6 that doesn't even have boats in it. And I think that's a wrap. I've got nothing else to say anyway, so see you next time. I'm out.